Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Bloom, Group Publisher of Roofing Contractor, and thank you for joining me for a special episode of our Best of Success podcast show. And so honored to be joined by Steve Slepcevic, the CEO of Strategic Response Partners. Steve, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited about our conversation today, Steve, because you're such an expert when it comes to crisis management. And before we got on, we were talking about storms. And there's definitely some very important things that all contractors need to know about storms and preparing for storms. So, Steve, tell everybody, what do we need to know?
Well, in the business, the main thing is to have a plan, right? The proper plan. But the plan actually starts with me as an individual, right? So spiritually, I find that spiritually having your house in order is the first, most important step in proper planning. Because I always tell my guys before we ever deploy to any type of disaster, you have no business going out to deployment unless your house is in order, that your relationship's solid, that you've handled all the mechanics back home, and that your family's safe and sound, and they have a plan as to if they can't get a hold of you and something happens back home, how to handle certain things that need to be handled so that you can effectively be outward focused and engaged, because it requires all your attention in those type of scenarios. So that's where it always starts with me. It's me first, family next, then the business model as to how we're going to move forward.
And so how do you recommend when it comes to that communication plan, because it's so critical, how do you set up your communication plans with your team, or how should contractors set up their communication plans with their team?
Yeah, so the communication, a lot of it has to come with intelligence, right? What is being communicated? What is the messaging? How is the messaging going to go out? Are they short, clear, concise messages so everybody knows what they're getting? What type of system are you using to get confirmation that they got the message, and what their job is and how they're going to be responding to it? So it's important whether the person's using a mass notification system and the comms are up, or whether they're using a satellite phone system and everybody on the team has a satellite phone, and you drill every 3 months. That encourages everyone to make sure that their phones are charged, or sat phones are charged, that they have everyone's phone number plugged in. And then also having your suppliers and your other additional subcontractors also having sat phones, because if you're in a storm area where in most wide area storms, the power's out and the entire communication system is down. So it doesn't do you any good for you to talk with your team members if you can't get a hold of your subs and your suppliers in that same communication channel, so that you can actually effectively work off the grid, but in a city within a city. Like your communications, you're bringing everything into that area.
Well, you bring up a really good point, Steve, when it comes to like satellite phones and satellite communication. How many contractors out there really actually have that type of communication?
Very few. But, for us as an organization, we've pushed real hard and we've been quite successful in getting many of the subcontractors that we work with, the mitigation teams, the structural engineers, the shrink wrap companies, the different groups that we work with when we're pushing into an area,
right,
to be able to have those sat phones. Because when I need a fuel cell dropped off, or I need power generation for a hospital, I cannot be at ground zero and not be able to have my vendor not show up because I couldn't get a hold of them.
Got it. Yeah. So again, that's so important to have communications. And truly, how important is it for every contractor to have some sort of satellite communication?
I think it's a must.
Okay.
It's a must. People are like, well, I haven't had comms go out in my area. But once you're out of cell service, the fact that you're stuck somewhere and not have communication, it's an inexpensive must-have route, especially where the climate is at today. To give you an example, when the Ukraine war started, you couldn't get a sat phone. The sat phones were back ordered for 8 months. You couldn't get your hands on a sat phone because all of them got picked up in the United States and got shipped over to Ukraine.
Okay.
So if a crisis happens and a person's like, okay, well, I need a sat phone now. Well, you're not going to be able to get one.
Right.
So,
well, yeah, for sure. And I guess
ahead of time. I always say handle the mechanics ahead of time, not when you need it. When you need it, you're not going to have it in most cases.
Got it. Okay. So let's say a contractor, I think this is an important topic to dive into a little bit more. So if I'm a contractor and I want to implement some sort of satellite communication, what do you typically do? Do like a monthly training or so because clearly it's something that if they're not, when you don't use it, you lose it, right? So it's hard you want to make sure that if you are in that crisis mode, you know exactly, all your team knows exactly what to do and how to, make sure that that is something that is ready to roll. So how often do you do training with your team if you were to implement a satellite system?
Yeah, so for us, we do it every quarter. We do it every quarter simply for the fact that it just reminds you when you pull the sat phone out, and all our satellite phones sit in a Faraday sleeve. Faraday sleeve is simply an EMF kind of blocker. So if there was ever a solar flare, or if there was an EMP type such scenario, it wouldn't fry the electronics on the phone. It's a nice case, slides in there. Every 3 months, we set up on our calendar and we pull them out of the sleeves and we make our calls. We have a very specific log. Here's the order of the calls that we make. And then we start with one message as to what that message gets out. The next person translates the next message. And then we see if that message, exactly like it was said, comes out exactly at the other end the same way. And it's all mixed up. So it's not a very clear communication about what the message is. It's like white picket fence, fruit stripes, milkman, Delta Airlines, right? So it'll be something like that where the person's like, oh, hold on. Please repeat the message. And then they'll realize they have to write it down. You know what I mean? So then the next person goes to the next person, and we make sure that we follow that everybody was conscious, highly focused, and the message didn't get disrupted. It's like calling when you played telephone as
right.
It's kind of the same kind of concept. But we found in the early stages of when we first started doing it, one person's phone wasn't charged, one person's SIM card went out. As you realize, recently we had a SIM card update from our provider, which then we had to collect a bunch of phones, bring them in, change the SIM cards, and update it to a new upgraded SAT system that's supposed to be good for the next 10 years. But again, we would not have known that had we not made a call and realized that those chips, there's an upgraded chip that became available. So what we did is we went ahead and started making those corrections. So this is where you make sure that your people are used to it. And then also when they're calling somebody and you're holding the 0 down until you get the plus symbol, then you can make the next number. So the person trying to call like a regular phone, they're not making the communication's not happening.
Right.
And on Hurricane Ian, I carry 2 sat phones.
Okay.
An Iridium and an Amersat. I couldn't get out for the life of me on the Amersat phone, but on the Iridium, it linked on the satellite immediately, like within 10 seconds, 15 seconds. This thing was spooling for like 20 minutes and I couldn't get a satellite link. And so when I talked to the satellite provider, they're like, well, Amersat is used heavily in that region. So there's way too much bandwidth going up to the satellites that was making it very difficult for satellites to connect in that area. But the Iridium, which has a bigger band of satellites around, was working.
Yeah.
So did I know that? I didn't know that until actually I was in the thick of it. But again, whether we're in a hurricane or whether we're doing, working with the border sheriffs or law enforcement along the southern border where we're off the grid,
right,
and I'm required to use it more regularly, I get the blessing to be able to run all my equipment, including satellite radios, which we have, which is a backup to our radio, right? So you have the radio, but you may have a range of 2 miles, maybe if you're really lucky with some big radios, maybe 5 miles. But the satellite to satellite, I could be on a radio from between somebody here and somebody in Thailand. It doesn't matter. Yeah,
that's awesome. All right. Well, note to all the contractors listening, make sure you check out a backup plan to have a satellite phone or some sort of satellite communication. Definitely. And like you said, it's a very small investment, which is great to hear.
Yeah. And there's several providers out there, but do your research. And I think that one of the ones that actually have some of the best deals right now is the satellite phone store. I think it's sat123.com or 123sat.com or something like that.
Okay.
But they have a good deal that, and compared to the other ones out there, but they provide a great service and they do a lot of military stuff too. So
Yeah, and we'll provide that website in the content as well. So the other thing too, I want to make sure we talked about was what should everyone have in their trucks? What should, again, so the satellite phones seem like that doesn't happen all that often, but of course you'll be glad if you have that backup system. But something that happens more often are things like you were saying before we got on, like down power lines, or you're in a tornado and there's debris everywhere. Like what should all contractors' trucks have in place, so if they're in a situation, they know what to do?
So I'm just going to share with you what we do, right? For us,
Yeah.
we have a simple deployment checklist. We have our Pelican cases that have our gear in it. So inside the gear is everything from, rain ponchos to tow straps, in case I got to pull another truck out of a muddy situation. We have our tracks that you can, if the truck needs to get pulled out. We have our tire repair kit. We put our fix-a-flat stuff in there, stuff that can keep me mobile because I'm running over nails and stuff like that. But we also have in there a medic kit, and we also have our hot sticks, which is if there's a power line, the hot stick will tell me if that thing's energized from a distance or not. I also want to make sure that my team is also briefed every single time, and most of my guys, as you know, are firefighters, urban search and rescue personnel, so they know. But I have other team members who are not. They're structural engineers. They're not the wisest guys, or they'll step out of a vehicle and there'll be a puddle of water and there'll be a down line, right? That can instantly kill them.
Right.
The other part of it is the team carries. There's a meter that sits on their neck. It's like a little lanyard, and it's actually really cool. You pull it, you pull the top part, and activates it. There's a little LED light that comes on, and that little sensor can sense if there's a high tension, high powered line that's near that area, so that they can get warned before they step in the area.
Oh,
And
that's
then
cool.
so I just do it because of the areas that we're going into, because we're on those
Right.
tornado chases, we're riding out the hurricanes. So I cannot expect them with their situation awareness, all their awareness, to know
Right.
where everything's at. A line could be down behind a small tree or whatever else, or something blocking it, and they don't see it. I don't want to risk the lives of my team members, because it's just critical. The other part of it is we use a Draeger gas meter. So the gas meter sits on their belt, and they're not even paying attention to it.
Right.
But we've had them go off, and they're like, "Oh my God." One of the guys like, "What, you didn't smell it?" The guy's like, "No, I didn't smell it." But that meter alerted me that there's a gas line that was ruptured through a specific area that he was going to. And so we got one of our keys, our gas meter keys, to shut the gas off. It was going to that property.
Okay, there you go. Well,
And then
those are definitely extreme things, because you guys are definitely first responders when it comes to some of those huge storms, and you're in the heat, right, on ground zero. But again, I think some of the most important things that you just said were, what can every contractor put in their truck that are easy, that are something that just that don't take up much space, but it'll keep them safe. Because bottom line, every contractor owner out there wants to make sure their crews come back safe. So that was an awesome. Can you run down that list again? You said something for to make sure that they can pull their trucks out, to have a hot stick, to have what were
tire
those
repair kits, ponchos,
Right, the tire
obviously
repair.
they're gonna have their battery backups so their cell phones aren't going dead. The satellite communications, because they're obviously gonna be off an area. So if they get in an area where they can't communicate, it's gonna be important for them to be able to get a line out.
Sure.
But without going through a checklist, I can provide you with a checklist.
Oh,
And
perfect.
again, not everything is going to apply to the contractors that we use for our checklist, but I'm happy to share that list. And then they can take from it what they feel is more appropriate and custom tailored, that fits to them and their geographical area that they're working in.
That sounds fabulous. Well, Steve, thank you so much for all those nuggets of information, because I know every contractor out there wants to be prepared and have all the tools at their disposal, and that they're ready when something, because you never know when those crisis management moments are going to come up. So thank you so much for that great information. If anybody has any questions for you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is you can simply email me, steve@srp24.com. The preparedness stuff, some of the preparedness resources we have, It's on a separate page, which is srp24.com/prepare.
Oh, yes, I've seen that page. That's a good one.
Yeah. And we're updating it with different types of resources, products that are out there. Again, we don't have any type of promo codes involved in it. I don't do that. I simply share the stuff that we use that we found to be very effective and useful tools that we've used for disaster planning, preparedness, and that type of stuff. And if people have any questions, they can just reach out to me, and I'm happy to share how I've done my family plan, how we've done our business plan, and then how we operate as a team in those areas.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, Steve, I know that this is your expertise, so we really appreciate you sharing those nuggets. And if anybody has any questions for us, it's roofingcontractor.com, wconline.com. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for all our free content, especially so you can stay up to date on all the great interviews that we're doing today, like we are with Steve. But most importantly, stay safe and healthy, and we can't wait to talk to you soon. Steve, thanks again so much.
Thank you for having me.